So I've been meaning to put together a little video series of working through the various systems of a carburetor and kind of going through the adjustment basics. So, you know, when you go to adjusting your Holley carburetor, you can have a pretty good idea, I guess, what you're doing. So I'm first going to work through the idle circuit, and then we'll go through the transfer slot and transition circuit, and we'll explain some of that. We'll get into our accelerator pump, we'll go through our standard jetting, and go through our secondaries. So we're going to use a vacuum secondary carburetor for this, because I'm assuming if you're running a double pumper, you should know a little bit more about what you're doing. This should all pretty much be common knowledge. If it isn't, you're probably going to want to start out with a vacuum secondary first. So I want to first express that the most valuable tuning tool that you can have with setting up carburetors is a wideband O2 gauge. I get mine from AEM, and I actually get them on eBay. It comes with the bung, your O2 sensor, and your gauge, everything you need, where you can really monitor your settings. So that's been a big help with getting my jetting right for various temperatures and whatnot, and just getting everything where I want it and being able to see exactly if I'm having a lean or a rich stumble. So it's been very helpful. They're only like $150, and I'll post a link in the description. So what I want to go ahead and do first is go through this idle circuit, and a lot factors into this, including ignition timing. Ignition timing will have a big factor on your manifold vacuum and just how you set up your idle circuit. So and they kind of work in tandem. So I'm going to talk about timing a little bit. I'm not going to go too in depth because that's a different topic, but generally you have different camshafts and intake manifolds, different exhaust. If your engine's tuned at all, it's going to be well off of those factory timing specs. It'll just run better somewhere else than what's specified. So this is a really good way to actually set initial timing. So we're going to go over that first. The first thing I want to mention is everyone probably knows that this is the main, idle adjustment screw, and it adjusts how open your throttle blades are. So if we take a look under here, you see here that our throttle blades, would be opened up more the more you open up this screw. Now, I don't know if you can see it on the video here, but there is a small square right here, not this circle, but there's a small square, and those are your transfer slots. Now, people go winging this screw all over the place, this main adjustment screw, and you can see here you start exposing too much of your transfer slots, and we'll talk more in depth about that later, but pretty much what you want to know is if you have too much of these transfer slots showing and you go to tromp the throttle, you're going to have that moment of low vacuum, and those transfer slots are made to account for that, as well as your accelerator pump, and you're just going to have a lean bog. So anyway, getting back to the timing in the initial setting, you want to set it so you only can see this little square, and so that's what you're after with this main adjustment. And your secondaries, hopefully no one has touched them from the factory. If you have a new carburetor, you're going to want to leave it. You're not going to want to mess with it. If it's been messed with, it's a little tricky. You don't want to set these to the transfer slot because that's actually well too far open. A lot of the Holleys come just almost completely closed off, where you're essentially just running you're idling with a basic 2-barrel. But you want to check on your factory specs. You don't want to have your transfer slots showing on those, but hopefully no one's messed with them. 9 times out of 10, no one has messed with those, and you'll be just fine. So anyway, getting back to our timing once more, once you have this set in this way, this really helps you to set your initial timing. And really quickly here, before we, one more thing before we get to the timing, you want to start with your idle mix screws, you want to turn these all the way in, and most carburetors will only have one on either side of the metering block, and these need to be adjusted equally. You see here we don't have one. They're just a set metering volume. You really can't adjust these on these carburetors, but if it did have a 4-corner system, you want to adjust them all evenly. As you adjust things, you want to adjust them in small increments. But with these, a good starting point is turning these 2.5 turns out. Now, once you have all these equally, you turn them all the way down seated, and you turn them 2.5 turns out, and you have just that square showing on your throttle blades. Now you can set your initial timing, and what you're looking for is about an 800 RPM idle with this setting. So you'll move your distributor around according to this to get that idle, and you want your engine fully warmed to operating temperature before you do this. But once it's warmed up, you can hone that distributor in, get that good, adjusting your idle with that, with moving your distributor around. I found that to be a really good way to find initial timing, and then your carburetor is set up good where you're going to get full use out of those transfer slots that I showed. Now from there, you're almost done with your idle circuit. The last thing that I like to look at is I like to stick a vacuum gauge on my carburetor. You want this to be showing full manifold vacuum. That's key. You don't want it plugged into one runner or something that's not getting full manifold vacuum off the carburetor. So your brake booster hose is a good thing for this, which would be back here. So they're usually located. There's a big orifice here. We'll just show you a big orifice on the back of the carburetor, or they have them on the front as well. Pretty easy to get a vacuum gauge on there and get a reading. But what you're going to do with this vacuum gauge is you're going to tune your idle mix for your highest manifold vacuum, and then you're going to just turn it, and you want to adjust them equally again, then you're just going to turn it a little richer from there. Now that's kind of the archaic method. When I say turn them a little richer, I'd say 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn, just richer to be safe. What I like to do, like I mentioned, the O2 gauge is great for this because you can see what mix you're setting it to, and I usually shoot for, if you have an O2 gauge, I usually shoot for a 13.5 to 14 to 1 air-fuel ratio, and that gives you a little bit of clearance where if it leans out a little bit and different temperature conditions or richens up, it's not going to leave you stranded. So you're going to be getting a good mix to all your cylinders. All right, the final thing I want to talk about with your initial idle setting is your float bowl height, and a lot factors into this. Now, a lot of people run mechanical pumps, and that's just fine. If you want to really perfect this setup, what you're going to want to do is run an electric fuel pump with a regulator. That way you're always getting the same flow, and it's not a pulsated flow, so a nice even flow. I run a Holley black pump on my autocross car with a fuel return line to help keep my fuel cool. But anyway, when I'm setting my float bowl settings, now on these Holleys they have a sight plug, and a lot of carburetors are different if they have glass sight plugs installed. Generally you'll want your level right in the middle, but with these older Holleys with the screw, when you remove your sight plug here, and you want to do this while the vehicle is running and have a little bit of like a rag to catch your fuel. You don't want to be pouring fuel all over, and it's nice to have someone who can shut down the car if it's way overfilled, if you can't get the plug back in time. But anyway, with these plug style, what you want is that fuel to be right at the lip of the bottom of where the screw is. With that, you'll have, it deals a lot with your jetting, at what RPM your jets are going to come into, so that's very important with all your emulsion circuits to have this set up correctly. And you want to have your fuel pressure set. I found that these brass float carburetors can't handle as much pressure. the max I ever put to these brass float Holley carburetors is about 6 psi, and I use a Holley or a Summit fuel pressure regulator so I can maintain that good pressure, and I make sure I put those as close to the carburetor as possible. Ideally, you'd have one that's center fed in between your tubing here, and it would go off of the regulator, and that would be best case scenario. But pretty much that's pretty much the end for setting float bowl height. It's simple. The theory behind it, it's simple to adjust. You just unloosen your top screw, and then you have your adjustment nut here. And what you want to do is once you loosen the screw, you don't want to mess up your gasket, so you'll get in here and you'll pop this nut up a little bit. You'll see that it seems sealed, and you don't want to turn it while it's sealed or you'll destroy that gasket. So you want to make sure it's popped up and off. And you want to have a rag again, because this is a high pressure area, so you want to have a rag wrapped around this when you're doing this. But ideally, you want to turn. I like to adjust my floats in an increment where I take the point on my nut here, and I'll just move that to the next notch. I like to have one point straight up with my float bowl. That helps keep it really simplified. So now naturally, when you turn your nut clockwise, you will be lowering your float, and you're going to be lowering your float level. And if you loosen this float nut, you're going to be raising your float, and it'll bring your fuel level higher. And again, you want to be right at the bottom of this screw. So anyway, that's pretty much it for setting your idle circuit and setting up your float settings. So anyway, that's kind of a quick overview of your idle system. Pretty simple. I hope my explanation helped. As I said, we're going to move through the rest of the carburetor. So if you have any questions, please post them below. And I'm going to keep on moving along. So anyway, hope you enjoyed.